Everything is manual. You download the patch, you test it in one firewall, you need to schedule the maintenance, you create the change request, and get the approval from internal customers. We noticed that we haven't finished the previous patching, and we already need to go to the next one. That was the challenge we tried to address, just constantly patching certain appliances.
Let's see here. I was thinking about like where I wanted to start and what I wanted to ask you about, and I think where I want to start is more around dispelling fact from fiction as it comes to marketing with SASE platforms. From an architecture standpoint, within the enterprise, how is the change from, let's call it like legacy VPN and remote access solutions to a platform that has ZTNA and zero trust implemented inside of it? What change and what shift does that create? And how does that get communicated back into the enterprise from an end user standpoint and from a non-technical executive standpoint of like, this is good, we want this is going to solve these problems?
The implementation of the SASE at Cepheid was just the first step. I never did it before. Of course, I had experience implementing VPNs in my previous companies. It was very common. The biggest challenge with the VPN, you have to maintain your gateways where your customers are, to make sure that the gateway is close to your customer for connection, for faster connection to your LAN environment. With SASE, it's all over the places, right? In our environment at Cepheid, we had 3 VPN gateways in North America, in Europe, and in Asia Pacific. Mm-hmm. But certain connectivity, for example, in China, we used to have a VPN gateway connecting through our gateway in North America instead of Asia Pacific.
Okay, but this is also like this idea of I mean, I'll just go ahead and lean into all the horrible marketing terminology that I hate, right? Like this idea of like on-prem to cloud applications or on-prem to SaaS applications. And, so in on-prem environments, you typically saw like hub and spoke network architectures because there was a central location and then like lots of satellite locations, or a central and like DR location, some sort of like primary sites. And so then VPNs got deployed inside of those because that's where the resources were. And you move into cloud applications or SaaS applications, but that doesn't completely eradicate all the on-premise needs. Like you still haven't, your on-prem changes. It could be a VPC in AWS or an Azure tenant or a GCP tenant, or maybe it's still a data center, right? But so within the SASE platform, you're still accessing those resources. They're just, you're shifting where the VPN connection changes to. I mean,
with the VPN, it introduces a different level of complexity in terms of how do you connect, for example, your IDP to your VPN solution. Let's say you have your on-prem environment. You have your firewall, let's say Palo Alto. Very good firewall, by the way. You set it up. How to authenticate user? It's in your on-prem environment. The easiest way is to connect to your IDP. Where is your IDP? IDP is your Active Directory. Mm-hmm. So the connectivity is established with on-prem environment. Therefore, the user connecting remotely is authenticated through the call to Active Directory domain controller. With the SASE, it creates additional overhead. If you want to connect your SASE provider to your on-prem environment, to your domain controllers. So with that, you have the opportunity to modernize it, to switch from your on-prem environment to your cloud identity. And that was the first step first thing we did to establish the connectivity reliable connectivity between SASE platform and our identity provider, which was Azure Entra ID, Azure Active Directory.
I mean, that okay. So like I immediately go into like you see this like cascading like waterfall of like dependencies that start to happen, right? Like, oh, we want
Correct.
to put in the SASE platform. So in order to get the SASE, we want the identity. And then in order to get the identity, we have to move the identity to Entra ID, right? So it's like now all of a sudden, you know.
You can do that, but you can imagine if you need to have that reliable solution. So, how many with VPN gateways? If you have only 3 VPN gateways, okay, you can establish connections to the nearest domain controller from each VPN gateway. You are done. And then you need to make sure that all the domain controllers used for authentication of the remotely connected users are properly patched, updated, and highly available.
Mm-hmm.
At least there is another domain controller. That's it. At the same time, if you use that VPN gateway or the firewall with a VPN gateway capability to collect the data for other stuff, like it acts as a normal firewall as well, and you need to have a connection. You need to collect the information about the sessions established not only internally but also externally. From internal users connecting just to normal internet. How you to get this data? You need to grab this data from the domain controller event log, but you never know what domain controller is used to authenticate that particular user. So if you have 45 sites and each site has at least 2 firewall appliances, and you have, let's say, 25 domain controllers worldwide, so you need to multiply 25 by 44. This is the number of connections you need to establish to be able to collect all these logs and then match the IP address with the username in order to reflect that username in your event log of the firewall and then pass it to Splunk. Um, that's a nightmare.
I'm smiling because there's a lot of really amazing things that you get with ZTNA. Right? I'm forget the whole SASE acronym. We're just talking about ZTNA and like this modernization of VPN, right? One of the top drivers that I have found with our clients moving into ZTNA is being able to audit user sessions and user logins. And it's not even close. Like, I mean, you get all these other benefits out of it, but from like I would say like greater than 80% of enterprises that we've helped deploy ZTNA has been about auditing and tracking user authentication and user events. And then you get into it and you're like, well, there's all this other cool stuff I want to talk about too. But just in tracking user authentication, like this is a pretty big problem for an enterprise. And if you're trying to track, if you have any sort of compliance or security framework that you have to adhere to, like anything, you have to do these things, but then you can't because, in your example, you have this matricy, of hundreds of places you have to go. Yeah.
Because the simple, actually, there is very simple question we need to answer. For example, for compliance reason or for security reason, we can see the application A is being used by someone in our internal network perimeter. Who is using that? We can say, oh, this is the IP address. This is what we know. And then with that IP address, we need to go to someone else. Can you give me in that particular day who was the person on that IP address? Oh, we can tell you that this IP address was given to device XYZ. And then you need to go to someone else to find, okay, on the device XYZ, on that particular date with this particular IP address, who was the user who logged into that machine. And there are 3 different group of people who are managing endpoints, user identities, and network. How we can put all of that together. And SASE actually and ZTNA helps to address this particular issue. It makes it more simple because you always have a content of the user connected to through ZTNA to any resource. through
Right. And
SASE
then
platform.
you can stream those events from your SASE
Yep.
platform into whatever SIEM you're using, and then go and
Yep.
do correlations. It's, you know, like this is, I don't feel like this gets talked about enough, of just, you know, Colonial Pipeline, right? Colonial Pipeline. Like in my brain, like immediately go to, I see images in my mind of like people with pickup trucks and tarps putting gasoline in their back of their trucks because the eastern seaboard of the United States is not, is running out of gas,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you read the details that were published, and it was here. This was a user credential for an ex-employee that was compromised on a VPN gateway to then gain access to the network, which then was able to move laterally and cause a lot of damage. And now you start to unpack that a little bit, and you say, okay, well, why wasn't the VPN gateway integrated with their IDP?
Mm-hmm.
Well, probably because they couldn't. It was either too old or too hard or too difficult or too complicated or too, there's lots of different reasons of like why, right? But you take this really simple thing of just maintaining consistent state of user identity across the network and actually authenticating a user. Like, is this user actually, like, is this a real person that should be connecting to our resources right now? And can we validate that or not? Right. And
True.
I can pick on Colonial Pipeline a little bit on this one because they, of course, had a major outage. Outage isn't the right word, but they had a major event over this.
Event.
But it's interesting. It's also interesting to me because when we started this a few minutes ago, you started talking about performance. SASE, is it related to reducing hub and spoke locations and long distance traversal for users as performance gain? But you take a step back and you say, okay, well, the enterprise win here can get centered around identity and identity control and identity audit because the enterprise actually has value in that, right?
Mm-hmm. Without it, absolutely, because all the companies operate in one or another compliance environment.
Mm-hmm.
They need to comply with certain rules, regulations, and to be able to provide the evidence that they are compliant. With the performance one is definitely about holding the traffic back to your VPN gateway or to your edge headquarter where you have a centralized environment to secure everything in one place is definitely the performance degradation, significant performance degradation for remote users. They never ever get the same experience when they browse the internet or when they connect to any SaaS applications from the remote site. While with the SASE platform, they do get almost the same experience as they connect to SaaS applications directly because their connection is established to the nearest POP. And if the traffic is not routed or doesn't need to go to internal network, it just being secured by SASE platform and redirected back to internet with all security in place, just controlling the DNS queries, controlling the type of protocols, type of applications, some scripts running. If we have CASB or TLS inspection, you can even see what is inside the encrypted traffic. So from that perspective, this big advantage to have SASE platform rather than just use your own. Moreover, on top of that, if you have enough resources to maintain your VPN gateways, your firewalls with updated signatures, with updated patches. So like most recently, last week or 2 weeks ago, it was big discussion on LinkedIn about the zero-day vulnerability.
I mean, I feel like I don't want to. I mean, I'll pick on FortiGate firewalls for a moment. There's been a
Yeah.
line. Now, I mean, this is one of those. When I say I'll pick on them, you have to become a major player before this becomes this type of issue, right? So like it's a byproduct of success. FortiGate makes an amazing product, but now there's enough deployed and there's enough surface area that it's a popular platform for people to look at and try to compromise. And it does feel like there have been a lot of 0-day and a lot of security vulnerabilities and a lot of critical patch events for FortiGate. And um, that's also from an operator perspective. If you're deploying, I mean, moving off of on-prem firewalls and moving onto a SASE environment, right? You give up, like, these are no longer my boxes that I own. And I feel like some people get really they don't want to give up that, like, idea of control, right? We don't
Mhm.
want to give this to somebody else. But then the flip of it is like, well, if you own it and control it, and now you have, let's just say you have, I don't know, I mean, if you've got, we'll make a simple example, right? You've got 50 locations with dual firewalls each. You've got 100 boxes now that you have to apply a critical patch to. Otherwise, it's going to get compromised, and you're going to have a major event on your network. Like, isn't that good? How do you weigh, and I mean, you made this a pretty big transition. Like, if you're talking to somebody and say, well, I want to own my own boxes, and I want control, and I don't want somebody else being in control, what would you tell them?
That was the challenge we tried to address. The patching circle was
Patching circle, I like that.
continuous. So if you do it, especially if you do it in a manual manner, everything is manual. You download the patch from the vendor website and then you test it in one firewall. Then you need to make sure that you conduct the verification that this patch does not disrupt any existing flows inside your firewall. And then you need to schedule the maintenance. You need to create the change request. You need to make sure that you communicate that properly to your internal customers, and
Mm-hmm.
you need to get the approval from the internal customers if it's disruptive. For example, some patches you can apply to one node of the firewall cluster and then reboot and apply to another, but some might not be compatible with this method of update. So you need to shut it down, or you need to at least to schedule some 10-15 minutes maintenance window to reboot your firewall and to validate whether it works properly or not. And if you have 24 by 7 operations, let's say manufacturing facility or business operations,
Mm-hmm.
it's quite challenging. So we noticed that we haven't finished the previous patching and we already need to go to the next one.
I'm sorry, I've lived this life so many. Oh,
So
yeah.
that what does it mean for business? That means we have dedicated group of people on our payroll who do this job day in day out, just constantly patching certain appliances inside our network perimeter.
Like, that doesn't create business value. Like, if
Exactly. That was my primary point. What the, we are not network company. We are medical company, medical device company,
yeah,
diagnostic company. We need to be focused on bringing value to business.
one of the um one of the things I've seen, and I've seen this with SASE being deployed, and I've seen it also with, like, MDM and UEM being deployed onto appliances, is this pushback um, within, you use customer, so I'll use your language, right? Within the internal customer base about, like, oh, you're doing this to spy on us, or you're doing this to, like, monitor us, and and my I've always been very curious about that response. When you hit this kind of fear button of, like, oh, you're just doing this to spy on us, and I'm like, I don't think you understand that your IT team does not have the time or care to be spying on you. Like, they're barely keeping up with what they need to do in order to keep the lights turned on, let alone, like, want to track and spy on you. So, how do you, from, like, a internal communication of rolling these tools out, because it becomes a big change, especially with, like, remote users. A remote user isn't usually authenticating to get on the internet. If you go into, like, an SWG platform, now all of a sudden you've got this agent that has to run, that has to be on the box, it has to be enabled in order for somebody to surf the internet on their work device. And change creates fear. And how do you communicate that to alleviate that fear?
Primarily, we were focused on what is changing. And from the beginning, our intention was how we can make life for our internal customers, our end users, better, easier, and more secured. That is the focus.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we even called it VPN-less, always on network access. What does it mean is the way we implemented our SASE platform, it was always on enabled, and we configured the policies which leveraged the internal PKI to issue certificate for endpoint devices. And we use the single sign-on with Entra ID instead of connectivity to internal Active Directory,
Mm-hmm.
where if a user already provided username and password, and that password is valid, an account is not disabled, and the device presents the certificate during the authentication session to SASE, which leveraging
Mm-hmm.
uh, your Azure IDP for authentication of the user, you don't need to re-enter your password.
So
That
you're talking about building an entitlement within the SASE platform. So this is again, this all gets confusing because we're getting like merging terms, right? Because um, a lot of what you're describing is an entitlement policy, right? You have to have a PKI certificate active on the machine, right? Like these are all things the user is not even aware of. Like it is the machine have a PKI? Is it have patches? Probably. What else do we see in common entitlements? Is the MDM in place and running, or is the
antivirus,
EDP?
etc. Yeah,
Yeah, and this is all transparent to the actual user on the computer. They don't see any of this stuff.
they don't. And most importantly, if you have if you build the internal dependencies, which allows you to make sure that it's like the principles of zero trust,
Mm-hmm.
you need to verify explicitly, right? So that means if your machine is not under control of the MDM, there is no way you can get a certificate. If there is no certificate, your machine cannot get connection. Even if you grab the Cato or Palo
Whatever.
Alto
Yeah.
VPN client from open source or GitHub or from the vendor side and install it on your home machine, there is no way you can connect because you need to present the certificate. Cato platform does not allow you because this is the way it was configured. So that means the chain of trust needs to be established first. How you can get that chain of trust is to make sure that the device walks through the enrollment process, entitlement process. For that, on the identity and access management part of it, you need to make sure that, just I hope it's not big secret, it's the way you can enroll user to be authorized to get connected through SASE platform. Because authentication, anyone can authenticate. Yes, we have all valid username and passwords, but is the user authorized for working remotely or not? In order to be authorized, you need to have at least be part of a particular group. But before you become part of this group, you need to have at least one corporate device assigned to you. That means you have a combination of factors which needs to be in place before the entitlement enrollment process is triggered. So for that, we worked with the IAM group to come up with how we can make sure that we can collect all the devices, mobile devices. So, and that was another challenge. It was invisibly addressed during the SASE enrollment process because before that they had just, we had a bunch of laptops, just an image laptop, give it to user.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow I believe it is enrolled with SCCM. But as far as you know, SCCM is not the inventory tool. So if your device stays for 90 days not connected, information is gone. Yeah, you still have agent. You probably will be able to manage it,
Mm-hmm.
but there is no data. So for that, we came up with the idea, okay, even if you have the information about the laptop, the most important question which needs to be answered, whom that laptop belongs to. And the answer is usually comes from guys who are responsible for managing endpoints, oh, we can grab it from the event log. Yeah, you can grab it when you can connect to the device.
Mm-hmm.
But where in your books you have this linkage between these two entities? So the idea was there are certain attributes available from the IDP. Like if you register device, there is an attribute called managed by. Why not put managed by user attribute to the device to make sure that you can link the device and the user together, and that will become your primary source of truth. So even if your uh, endpoint management records disappear for some reason, you still have a copy. Yeah, you know there is a laptop which belongs to this user, and once these laptops become active in the network, you will be able to match whether this laptop belongs to that user or not. So that helped us to create the next thing as group membership based on the attribute. So for all users who don't have any corporate devices issued to them, this attribute is empty, it's null. But if you have that attribute not empty, then that user becomes a member of a group which defines who has at least one corporate device belong to them. So that is another step. So if that device which belongs to you is corporate issue device, then we need to make sure that we can start working on the automation for our on our PKI, how each time we issue the new device and device is linked through Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, doesn't matter, through the managed by attribute, we can get the certificate for that particular device, for that particular use case scenario, whether it's a connection to corporate Wi-Fi or VPN or always on global protect SDP. So, and those are two different certificates. It's like for corporate Wi-Fi, yeah, you have a library card. But if you want to connect remotely, you need driver license or
Yeah.
passport for international travel. So with that, we came to the conclusion, okay, we now need to create different types of templates with the different OIDs in the certificate to make sure that we can distinguish this is your library card, it's not for your international travel. This is your, they're all client certificates for client authentication,
Yeah.
but how to distinguish what type of certificate? So you create the custom OID on your PKI, and then the PKI is issuing different type of certificates for different use case scenarios. And that creates the next step for the, you protect not only just identity with username, password, and MFA, but also the device. Because then MDM or UDM takes care of the rest. So if your device, but that is the next step. So if your device is not compliant, then you can enforce certain policies. So you can tell, for example, you can suspend authorization until the device is fully patched, it gets anti-malware or most recent zero vulnerability
Yeah.
security patches on it before it is authorized to get connected to our internal network perimeter.
I work with a lot of companies from startup, like inception, all the way through multi-thousand users, and I'm like trying not to interject because I'm thinking of all these stories. When you're like 50, 100, 200 people, who has what equipment isn't really a concern for that size company. I mean, if you're a startup and you've just taken, an A round or a B round, it's how quickly can we hire, and you're just throwing laptops at them and you're just moving
Mhm.
forward and trying to build as quickly as possible. When you turn around and you're 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 employees, and now you start talking about how many devices each employee on average has and touches, and there's a laptop plus a desktop plus a tablet plus a phone plus this plus that.
Mhm.
This becomes a really interesting problem that you have to deal with. And then you get a compliance mandate or a supply chain mandate or a client mandate that says, um, prove to us or ensure that our data is only accessed by company owned
Yep.
equipment. And you're like, well, okay, well, how do we do that now? And And this is a good example of like, well, you're building a chain of trust here, or how do you actually validate these things? Okay, well, now we know that we own this device and we're control of this device, and we have patches on this device, and this device is authenticated and it belongs to who it's supposed to be. And these are all kind of things that you start implementing and you start enabling. But inevitably it happens. I mean, every organization I've ever worked with hits some point of scale where all of a sudden they have this question posed to them, which is along the lines of like, or yeah. And the other thing that I found that has been very powerful is as companies are moving into HRIS platforms and have more automation, not just from an HR team, but then from all the way down to a manager level of being able to onboard and offboard team members and give them rights. This gives a potential of automation to feed into the IT teams that are managing these platforms, where now you don't have to have tickets created and you don't have to wait for people to do stuff on keyboards. I mean, have you seen that change as you've rolled this out? Have you guys gone through the process of starting into integration with your HRS?
It's a little bit different in our mind. But before we come to this point, it's absolutely you're absolutely right. It's a great example. I remember in my past experience, maybe 15, close to 18 years ago, in one of the companies, we had a conversation about the certain things, about the reliability of our systems. And I remember the meeting we had when one person was so proud that how our systems reliably built that he had two laptops issued to him, and but the second laptop was staying at his home, and he never used it since it was given to him. And then maybe 2 years later, he was in the situation when the first laptop he left in the office, and he took the second one. He haven't used for 1, 2, 3 years, and he tried to open it. Enter. He remembered his old password at that time because it was cached. He had some pattern of his passwords. He was able to enter it, and then he was able to run the VPN client. The person was a little bit techy, and he realized, okay, for VPN, I need to enter my existing password, and he was able to connect. But that was very bad thing.
Ugh.
Because with a SASE, especially with approach used at Cepheid, that should never ever work, because you bring certain risks when you connect with your 2, 3 years old machine, which is not patched, connected to internet. We don't know what may happen with that machine, and whether there is another malware sitting on that laptop. That should be blocked. But even with, if we cannot block it on the checking the compliance of the device, at least the certificate on the device will not be valid at the time if you didn't use it for 2 or 3 years, because we issue the short-lived certificate, and when machine keeps heartbeat connection to MDM to SASE, then we renew the certificate. Once we cannot get the heartbeat from the machine, we cannot renew the certificate. It's just your digital key.
SASE introduces CASB functionality. So cloud
I
access.
haven't answered your previous question.
Please.
It was about the HRIS.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that should be primary source of truth for all HR data, no doubts. So, and many companies are working on the implementation either through the identity governance process, so direct integration with between the IDP and the HRIS system, like the Workday, for example. At Cepheid was a little bit different because the Danaher, the parent company, owned all the companies, all operation companies, and primarily managed the HR system, HRIS system. So all the integrations between HRIS system and identity system supposed to go through the identity governance platform. And there are plenty of platforms available, some well-known, some less known, like SailPoint, one of them. Microsoft has its own entitlement management system, which is deeply integrated with Entra ID as well. And my previous company, we had the integration between the ServiceNow, workflow, the Workday, and Active Directory and Azure Active Directory for the automatic account provisioning, deprovisioning, and role-based access control. It's like the birthright permissions, which are assigned by default to the appropriate person based on the profile defined in the Workday. But that requires a significant amount of time and effort. You need to define the org structure and then reflect that how that org structure and the group membership should be applied to your profile across different type of application systems and your security clearance level, I would say.
I mean, if you haven't rolled out integration, I mean, this is a lot of it's a lot of work, right? I
True.
mean, but you know, the I guess you could say the light at the end of the tunnel here is I don't think any enterprise, and I mean, this is true for IT as well. Like, IT doesn't want to be in a position where we're like limiting the business from being able to function, or people can't work because, you know, they can't get access to something. I mean, I find this like misconception still occasionally of like, you know, like this, you know, like IT's just there to people, you know, to block everybody from doing stuff. And it's like, no, we're here so you can work. And we're also here so that way we don't like accidentally kill the business at the same time because of something, right? You know, it's very much like an entitlement, an enablement function for the company. But you know, when I guess my little commercial on this is every place I've seen that has integrated their HRS system with their identity, that has fed this end to end, has enjoyed the benefits of doing it, and has been able to increase their pace and their speed. And then, of course, if you don't have an IT practitioner doing certain manual tasks, and it can have some automation from like hiring, they can do other things that can help the business move forward again. You know, we're going back to this earlier point about patching, right? You're not dedicating resources to do, you know, to do tasks that you know, there's no reason you can't automate.
Yeah, completely agree. And not only that, it actually improved the user experience because manual work usually prone to error.
Sure.
And we had plenty of errors like misspelled name, misspelled family name that may create wrong the UPN or creates the misspelled email address. And it takes time to replicate it. Once it is replicated, you cannot create a duplicate one. You need to delete the old one and then wait for the replication to take place and then create the new one, and etc., etc., etc.
I love that example. It's such a benign example, and it's such a problem. It's such a pain to fix.
Yeah, because you have to first to remove it. But if you
Right.
if you are a big organization, you just made the error, and overnight it was replicated across the globe, across all your domain controllers. Before you can create the new one, you need to make sure that the old one removed. But if you remove it from your domain controller, it will take a while before all this data is replicated across all domain controllers. And then you need to create corrected one and wait for another day or at least few hours before the data is replicated once again. But there is another challenge with that. That actually may create some security risks as well. Let's say uh, Usually in all identity systems, if the identity system is a primary source of truth, there are certain attributes which used by third-party application for authentication and then for authorization through internal built-in system of roles and permissions. And let's say you have John Smith, vice president of finance, who left the company. Usually, when the person leaves the company, the account of that person is disabled. Mm-hmm. And then after a certain period of time, the system gets this account removed completely. But if there is another person, John Smith, let's say customer service agent, with the same first name, the same last name, comes on board. In HRIS systems, those two John Smiths will be completely two different people. Mm-hmm. One John Smith with a history of the senior vice president, and another John Smith is a customer service agent. While in the identity will keep just only one attribute, john.smith@company.com. So any system which is configured for automatically send notifications about the transaction, they will start sending emails to that SMTP address, and that could be sent to new John Smith agent of the customer service, and it could be sensitive data.
This goes back to identity governance and policies. Correct. A lot of this is like, these aren't technical problems, really. Like, these are business policy decisions. I
would say it's a process.
Yeah, problem. Because you have, what you're talking about really is like, has the company matured to the point that they've had this problem yet, right? And if they haven't had the problem yet because they haven't had name collision, at some point it's just like, how big do you have to get before you have name collision? At some point you do, and then you have to start making decisions. If you're doing first initial last name, what does the next person get? Are they you're gonna put numerals after it? Like, you have to, like, until you've done it, like, you don't know what to do, and you're like, okay, now what do we do, right? And then companies change from first initial last name, and they do like first name dot last name, or then they, and it starts opening up all these other things you have to think about, like you just said, right? If you had a John Smith that then left, and then a new John Smith that came in, can the new John Smith have the same email address or not?
Or they may coexist. You may have John Smith. For example, in my previous company, we had many people with the same name from like Rodriguez. It's a very famous name, very popular name in Costa Rica, Mexico. Yeah. There are many Rodriguez. So there is a middle name, and there are different middle names, and there is a second first name. Mm-hmm. So for that particular purpose, for example, most of the HRIS systems these days, they support not only just first name, second name, first middle name, second middle name, last name. They also support the preferred name. Mm-hmm. And the HRIS system allows the generation of the unique identifier, not only just the ID, but the identifier for automatic generation of the SMTP address, which is then reflected to your UPN for authentication, which will be used as your primary login to any corporate systems and applications. It's like yes, you probably the small company and you never faced that before, but these smart people learn not from their own mistake, they learn from someone else's mistakes. So if it never happened to you, it doesn't mean it will never happen to you in the future.
Or you end up like AT&T, where if I worked for AT&T, my email address would be like MC37429. It's just, and then they've started aliasing, so Max.Clark gets forwarded to MC37429. I mean, it's again, these are all you have to be successful in order to have these problems. Like, this is definitely a byproduct of success.
And we need to keep in mind there are certain attributes which clearly built for applications to be used within the application, like
Mm-hmm.
uh, my employer ID. It could be the combination of symbols, letters, numbers, etc. It's not human readable. It's readable, but it's not human friendly.
Right.
SMTP address, so the UPN, by design should be human friendly. So if I remember Max, yeah, I know Max
Yeah.
dot at itbroker.com. That is my association with Max, whom I had a pleasure communicating with. Or if I have my business partner, Patrick at gatornetwork.com.
Yeah.
So there are certain things for people to make their life easier. Certain things, certain attributes like GUID, unique identifier, it's for machine, for applications. I cannot remember GUID, especially if the GUID 256 symbols long, or the
Yes.
encryption key is 2048 symbols.
I'm trying to forget numbers, not add more to my brain at this point. I'm tapped out. Um,
Yeah, I don't even these days. I don't remember the phone number. Okay, I'm lying. I remember the phone number of my wife, but if you ask me the phone number of my close friend, no
no,
way.
no.
Uh, in all days, it was the uh, natural to remember the phone numbers for your parents, for your close relatives, for your some. These days, no, I have more than thousands of contacts in my contact book. No way I can remember even 5% of it.
I had a CIO roll out a ZTNA platform,
Mhm.
and this is before SASE existed. And the conversation that we had, his expression was, "I want my offices to look like a Starbucks," meaning that he didn't care where people were located, what network they were connected to. The way he was managing and thinking about how he was supporting corporate resources, it was just, you have a company device that's issued to you, and that company device is connecting to the internet in some way, and then once you're connected, you can then authenticate with us and you can get access to corporate resources. Now, so he used the Starbucks term in the sense of like, the only infrastructure they put in their offices, they had network and they had internet and they had wireless and they had plugs, physical network ports you could plug into, but there wasn't any security built into it, and there wasn't any assumption that being in the office was any better for you than being anywhere else on the planet, except that they had really fast internet connections. I mean, they went out of their way to make sure that people wanted to go to the office, and there was lots of other amenities in the offices, and lunch and snacks and games and all the different things that you put into an office. But and I'm curious, like, as you rolled out SASE and you moved into this always on idea, and what was your quote, right? Always on network access, VPN-less, always on network access, right? I love that. I wrote it down. Um, did that end up changing how you looked at and related to your corporate network assets and your office locations, and what assumptions were being made around them, how they were managed, how people worked inside of them?
We can distinguish different use cases and scenarios in a corporate environment. Uh, we're not trying with SASE ZTNA, we're not trying to protect user endpoint devices. Say, in spite of the fact we do that with SASE platform and SDP client, ZTNA client rollout, what we're trying to protect is our corporate, I would say, crown jewels,
Mm-hmm.
our data, our intellectual property, our products, our information. This is what we're trying to protect. With that said, we may have different use case scenarios for the deployment of the SASE platform from the network perspective. In classical Starbucks, no one is expecting IT to bring any gears or whatever to Starbucks in order to allow, let's say, someone VP level to be able to connect and read his or her email when that person is in Starbucks. But the expectation that the level of security when the person is in Starbucks is the same as when the user is connected in the office. With that said, we need to define the environment where do we have anything to protect in the Starbucks except that laptop? Nothing, right? Definitely not a coffee machine. It does not even belong to us. So from that particular use case where there is nothing to protect in this environment, do you really need to build your own infrastructure? That is question number one. And there is no right or wrong answer because there are other components to that. If your office is just 5, 10 sales customer care people and there is nothing in there, just coffee machines, printers, reception, maybe we don't have anything to protect. But if you have the same environment but multiplied by 100, you have 500 daily users in that environment. You can imagine the overhead of 500, at least 500 devices connecting simultaneously from that location. It's a different story. Mm-hmm. So we need to keep that in mind, and in each case, the answer might be different. So if you have lab environment or your manufacturing environment, you definitely want to protect it because you cannot put the SDP client on your lab machine. Or you have certain type of devices, sensors, IoT devices, which cannot even handle SDP. They work on much higher application level. They cannot handle on the low level. You cannot put anything on there. And they have their own requirements for the protection. And sometimes, in many cases, you cannot even patch those devices because they are managed by a third-party vendor. Then your approach is different. So you need to protect that environment completely separately. And in many cases, like at Cepheid, you need to put multiple layers of protection. So the SASE is just one of them. But there is a second, and there is a third, and there is a fourth layer of protection. Like in OT environment, you may have multiple firewalls. It's fully air-gapped, and certain configuration is applied on the endpoints, on your LAN, your wireless environment, and before it reached even to SASE. So it's multi-layer approach. But answering your question, yes, and even at Cepheid, we had one use case where, two use cases, where we had no infrastructure. It just another office with internet access, and people just were connected through it to the public internet with SDP client. They are all protected and they are all secured, the same way as when they work from home or from another office. SDP is always on. For that particular use case, if the office is not big and the bandwidth is enough and they don't need to protect any assets inside that particular office, yeah, absolutely. The answer is yes.
How does somebody sell this to their company? Let me expand on this a little bit, right? I feel like so much of IT gets distilled down to, can you quantify return on investment? If we spend X money, we're going to get Y as a result of it. And in a sales function, in a marketing function, in a manufacturing function, you usually can line inputs and outputs up to some degree. It's harder in IT, and it's really hard in cybersecurity spaces to say, we're going to spend this much money and we're going to get this tangible result back to the organization. In some cases, when you're talking about replacing legacy infrastructure, we have these firewalls, it costs us this much per year to have them. We have to have this support agreement attached to them. We have this many people maintaining them. We have this many people patching them. We have all these. Now you can kind of quantify and you can build out this thing. You say, okay, collectively for this program, we're spending this much money. And instead of spending this much money over here, we want to spend it over here on this other thing instead. And an organization can then understand it because you have expense that's already in the books, right? You're going to switch the columns where that expense is going. But in a lot of cases, the benefits that you're gaining out of these things, the benefits that you gain out of identity and having identity governance go end to end to authenticate, right? Like that, saying we're going to spend $1 per user for stronger identity governance, like, yes, there's benefits to the organization, but it's not readily apparent if you haven't been through this before of saying this actually solves this problem for the company. And a lot of this, SASE, ZTNA, the IDP integration, being able to, we haven't talked about CASB and DLP and these other things. In a lot of cases are net new deployments for people. The company has never experienced running a CASB. They don't have experience with DLP. They don't have experience, with having an entitlement based on a certificate being pushed to a corporate device and what they get out of it as a benefit. How does somebody sell this to their organization if they haven't been down this path before?
We didn't sell it. Those are the benefits we've got after the implementation. For example, I knew from the beginning this is the way we should do that. To build a chain of trust, to build the dependencies, because that is the only way it will not with a nightmare of maintaining it. Because with the automation of this process and building the dependencies between different components will allow you to build a smooth process of the onboarding, offboarding, entitlement, and reduce the day-to-day operations. It's impossible to sell the day-to-day operations as a benefit, because that initially that didn't reduce the number of people, resources required to support. Nothing. The only, in our particular case, we reduced the headcount on the network portion because with a SASE, we don't need additional people just to patch all these firewalls or Silver Peak appliances, the SD-WAN appliances, because since we moved to SASE platform, it's the responsibility of the vendor to make sure that each device is properly patched and the version is compatible, and to make sure that in a highly available environment, we have 2 appliances, at least one is up and running, while the second one is being patched or updated, and it's fully automated. And all the additional benefits you just described, the security benefits, additional compliance level, the ability to get logs, this is what you can sell to InfoSec and to CIO, to your leadership team, because that is one of the goals. So if it's one of the objectives they want to achieve by doing certain things which are not possible with the legacy platforms. Or with the legacy platforms, it's possible to connect 25 whatever domain controllers with 90 firewalls worldwide, but it's a lot of complexity, and that will come at a cost.
Right, but that's like a reactionary. That's like a reactionary place. Like, hey, as an organization, we want to be able to connect identity authentication and authorization. We have a we're from a compliance standpoint, we have to do this. From a customer contract requirement or supply chain, we have to do something, and then now IT can go out and create it, right?
Mhm.
Um, from a hey, we already have firewalls deployed, and people in the offices are connecting to the internet, and we have this VPN solution from our firewall vendor that's pinning traffic, and it's horrible for the end user, but they still can connect and remotely access our resources. And we don't have this strong identity path from point A to point B. And we want to do these things, but to do these things, we have to spend money, right? Without it being reactionary from an IT team, but more proactive from that team. Like how would they go about taking that back to the organization? Say, hey, look, we need budget to do these things because we want to get these results out of it. If the organization hasn't crossed that line where they say we need to have these things go facilitate it for us.
Maybe it's more theoretical because in each organization they might be different use case scenarios. For at Cepheid, it was rapidly growing, especially pre-COVID and during the COVID time. Uh, and with the rapid growth, the complexity of the environment uh, became, I cannot say unmanageable. It was still manageable, but the number of issues and the impact on the business started growing.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, it became painful. So, to reduce that pain, uh, the pain reduction required some prescription, and
Mm-hmm.
the doctor prescribed SASE.
Yeah. I,
So
I,
for us, it just like we had multiple incidents, and some incidents were minor, some major, and the process was not very mature, and some discrepancies and gaps in terms of the managing the tools and technologies we owned at that time.
mm-hmm.
So SASE was not a solution. SASE was one of the components with the people and process changes inside the organization, which helped to make it more scalable and simplify the infrastructure footprint in our environment.
You made a comment a minute ago about needing less people in the network team because you weren't patching anymore. It became the responsibility of the SASE vendor. But this wasn't that like they just shifted into doing other things as opposed to being responsible for patching, X, in number of firewalls on a weekly basis. Like I would imagine that their, happiness and enjoyment of their jobs probably went up significantly because, like if you're in this constant like windmill of just patching and doing menial tasks, I mean, even if it's on a keyboard, it's still not really satisfying, in the grand scheme of things, right?
Not only that, if your job is just to do patching, so you hire generalists who are familiar a little bit with the firewalls, little bit with Silver Peaks, little bit with Riverbed, F5, whatever tools and technologies you may have in your environment, and they just do it constantly, and you have very high, uh, it's low retention rate
Yeah.
because you people just become familiar with the process, they reach their maximum, they just start looking for another job, and then you need to spend your internal resources, your internal time and resources to teach newcomers what is our process, what we expect from you to do, etc., etc. And also, your engineering team is actually, when the environment is unstable, your engineering team, instead of bringing value to the business, they constantly involved in resolution of the existing technical issues in your current environment. So instead of doing that, one of the approaches we took at that time was how to build the network DevOps, not two separate groups, but those who build the environment run it.
That's a good
First,
change.
yeah, it was a big change, but that because they are involved anyway, because it was 3 times a week they were on the call for 1-2 hours just to help operations team to figure out what the issue is and how to address it and how to make sure that it doesn't go from bad to worse. And the number of tickets we had to vendors like Cisco, like Palo Alto, or Silverpeak was huge. It just but when teams started doing network DevOps, where they are focused on the product. So if you own the SASE platform, everything related to SASE, it's yours. Of course, you are interested on this stabilization and automation of the routine tasks. If your operations, no, you're getting paid by the number of tickets you resolved. Mm-hmm. So, and if you have the same issue appears again and again, open the ticket, click, resolve the ticket, wait for the next one, even if it is the same.
What surprised you in this process? Going through and identifying and then rolling out and deploying and now maintaining a SASE platform?
The biggest surprise was, I would say, the simplicity.
How so?
One console for everything. It's usually, there was a marketing one pane of glass where you can see everything. And each vendor comes with the same thing again and again. And sometimes one pane of glass actually becomes one glass of pain. With Cato, was it perfect? No. But much, much, much better than what we had before by jumping from one console to another console, or if you want to change this, you need to go there, or you want to routing, or you need to go there, and you need to go to different products. No.
So the surprise being that it actually was a single pane of glass and it actually worked.
Yeah. I really like that. And with modern UI, again, are there any areas for improvement? Yes, no doubt. But it was so easy, so intuitive, human friendly to present it to someone. Very easy. So even some non-technical people were just, wow, it was good. That surprised me a lot. Their ability to fine-tune, tweak the product and respond quickly was another one. What else? The speed they're implementing new features and capabilities and introduce the security fixes on the platform for various vulnerabilities or attacks was another one. And of course, the people who were ready to help at any point of time, because we heard a lot that sometimes it's not about the product, but the level of support you can get from the team. And with Cato, it was fantastic. Yeah. Was it perfect? No, but it was a continuous improvement process with them, and I really like the way we collaborate, communicate with the Cato group. Few things maybe we expect it to be a little bit more technical, like the training materials they published. especially for folks with 10, 15, 20 years of experience. Guys, you need that should be more technical
Yeah.
than what you published. But anyway, it was very good. It was very good starting point because a lot of other stuff we learned during our collaborations during the implementation process as well. That was very good.
You made the example about moving to a DevOps model with your
Mhm.
network team, where the people building the network own the network and maintain the network. Right? This kind of idea and approach. And earlier I mentioned another CIO that took on this mentality around like the Starbucks idea of their offices and their models.
Mhm.
Going through this, how 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 have things changed for you and how you approach network infrastructure, security asset within this organization, like and at a conceptual level, right? Because you mentioned something that was actually interesting to me, which is like your primary goal is not protecting your user devices, but it's protecting your intellectual property and products and information and data of the business, right? So like what's really valuable is protecting the business. And I hear that a little inference that like the device isn't necessarily, it's like an ancillary. You have to protect, you need to protect the device in order to protect what you actually want to protect,
Mhm.
right? But not the goal isn't necessarily protecting the device. The goal is protecting the company. But from like a mentality shift of approaching this, of you know, what else changed for you along the way?
The way the team work
Mm-hmm.
definitely changed. So we established from the beginning, when we just started thinking about it, how we can make it more optimal way. And it was not directly related to SASE because we actually adopted it across other groups within the network team and with unified communication collaboration team. We to be more agile, less reactive, more proactive. Uh, get the better understanding and full visibility and transparency not only within the team but across the entire organization, what we are doing, what keeps us busy, what is in our roadmap, what is coming soon, to make sure that we are focused on the business priorities. What is important for business?
Mm-hmm.
Do we solve the problem business expect us to address? Because in many cases we were focused on IT issues, not on the business issues. Just can give you one example, like uh, is it wireless critical in the office environment, in the business environment? Oh, you know what? Yeah, wireless is nice to have. Yeah, sometimes some VP can connect laptop, or at the end of the day, they can plug their laptop to the cable, present in the conference room. Not
Mm-hmm.
big deal. Yeah. But when you visit the site, when you speak to people, uh, just can give you one example. In our warehouse, you can imagine the warehouse is huge space. When
Mm-hmm.
the person need to make the inventory,
Tall
uh,
racks. Yep.
with racks, yeah, uh, they used to do that manually by entering the information to the computer system. Uh, and there was wireless connectivity established for the zebra scanners.
Mm-hmm.
And because the wireless was, I would say, not completely designed in accordance with best practices and standards.
Warehouses have very specific requirements to get wireless
Exactly.
in them. Yep.
Yeah. And we noticed that in some places they were designed the same way as the office environment.
Mm-hmm.
But I just can give you one example. The wireless network was built when the warehouse was built.
Yeah.
That means it was empty.
Yeah.
But when you put all your stuff to the shelves, there is no wireless signal.
Yep.
Because the wireless access point not in each and every row.
Yeah.
Moreover, there are no directional antennas over there. So there was a lot of work. But yeah, wireless is less critical. But for people, it's 80% reduction in productivity. It's one story if you can go and scan with a barcode scanner. Another story, you need to write it down, go back to your computer, and enter it manually. So wireless is business critical for the productivity, because if they cannot complete the inventory, we cannot start shipping products to clients. If we don't ship products to client, we don't get paid. We
Yep.
don't get paid. We cannot put into our books the revenue. Cannot book revenue that impact shareholders.
Yeah.
So very simple thing, minor thing is, but can dramatically change the way people work. Another example, the collaboration. Those who design and build, run it. If you have one team, they are deeply involved and communicate not just only when they design a network, but when they work on day-to-day basis on operationalization process, operations process. At one moment, it was just a request for operational request. There was a new model of the Zebra scanners, and our team responsible to provide support for the warehouse, they just come up with the question, oh, guys, it was model XYZ. We are going to buy XYZ 2.
Very.
It's modern, easy to use, Android based. Oh, cool, good. Because it was the joint team, they immediately knew what questions needs to be raised before they respond to the request. If it's just operations, oh yeah, go
That's
ahead.
good. Yeah.
And they sit together, they check the tech spec. We knew that we're going to replace our wireless network upgrade was already scheduled. Guys, we need to make sure that it will be compliant with the new format, new standards, and then realize the model proposed by the vendor may not be the best fit because they do not support certain channels we expect to be available from our Cisco environment. And these channels and those frequencies are critical for reliable connectivity. So they work with another vendor, with that vendor, to come up with a different version of the Zebra scanners, which are compatible with the Cisco wireless protocols, introduced with a new wireless access points, and then it worked perfectly. If it never comes to the engineering groups, if people who design the environment and people who run the environment are different, sometimes it's the right approach, but in some cases it's better to have a smaller group, fully automated, but able to respond immediately with the knowledge and experience, rather than just to have two separate groups where the architects or because I don't expect the person with a 20 years of experience architect doing day-to-day job, simple things, manually entering new SSIDs or DHCP scopes on the DHCP server or configuring VLANs manually. Hell no. We don't hire such people to do so simple job, but we hire those people to properly put the automation in place where you don't need even to hire the person who will enter all this information manually or do that manually, because you can run the automation.
It's a. I love the example, and I'm trying to like distill it elegantly here, but really this change from reactive with the organization to partnering with the organization and the different business units. And if you're spending too much time just being reactive to tickets and reactive to events and reactive to outages or reactive to this, or or manually doing things, you never cross the line into actually being able to go and sit with the person in the warehouse and understand what's going on with their job and how are they actually doing things, and how do how is productivity impacted, and how do you improve productivity, which isn't necessarily, that's not like an IT responsibility per se. Like, a lot of companies aren't going to say like the IT department's responsible for warehouse productivity, right? Like, that's not like a KPI that's being tracked.
Mm-hmm.
But then going around and enabling that, has direct impact on the business. It has direct impact on, operations team that's managing warehouse and shipping orders and maintaining inventory. And by the way, finance cares about how much stuff is in your inventory because they have to keep track of
Yep.
that in your books, right? So they care very much so. And there's all these like trickle downs, right? You used the example of revenue, but like there's so many of these different things within the organization that get touched by this relatively seemingly simple thing. But being in a position to actually go and invest time and energy and to work with that other team and work with that other department and understand what's going on with them, and then say, hey, we can now implement and support you and give you a better outcome here, because we're not bogged down with these other things that we used to be. I mean, this goes back to my earlier question of like, how do you sell this to the organization, right? Like, well, you can't quantify that, right? Like, you're not going to be able to quantify to the CFO, like, I'm going to get you better inventory numbers as a result of implementing the SASE platform, so that way you can close your books faster and report, you know. But I bet you it happened, right? Like, so, it's just, it's a very, the story always stands out to me because after the organization sees it, they can never imagine going back to what it was like beforehand. But if they haven't experienced it yet, it's really hard to paint that picture and say, this is where we want to get to, and this is why we want to make these investments. Because, they, why should we, right? Like, it's like this weird thing.
You can only look back
Yeah.
and see the results. You cannot predict or imagine in many use cases, many scenarios. It's like, you remember it was the Steve Jobs who said how we can just create a focus group and then start asking them about how or what the best user interface should look like if they have no clue what the graphic user interface
Yep.
is all about. The same thing here. It's some people can recognize when they look back where they were and where they are after the implementation, and then they can say, oh yeah, that was a change, and the impact is positive, or the performance was increased, the improved, and then we can measure in comparison where we were 1, 2, 3 years ago. The same with SASE. It's one of the examples I gave you last time we spoke. I never thought about it. Like when R&D or some manufacturing or our scientists who run some in the lab environment some tests, and test takes sometimes unpredictably from 10 hours to 18 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to get that data, but you don't know how the machine will calculate that data and when they work with the sample. So it's just robot doing certain things and collect the data, and when sample is completed, then they can take the data about this sample and start analyzing it. So, and in many cases, the person who ran the test on the machine start the shift and then goes home, and the next person who comes on the second shift monitor it, and maybe sometimes even pass it to the third person next day. And if it is critical important what they do, they need to connect remotely to the machine to validate whether it is completed or not. If the machine in isolated environment cannot just automatically send the results of the test whether it was completed or not. So, and in this case, they sometimes need to validate whether it's going in accordance with design criteria in accordance with the process they built. So they need to have the real-time data on it. And there are plenty of machines installed in that lab environment. What they do, they connect remotely and see how it's going. In order to connect remotely, you need to establish VPN. In order to connect to VPN, you need to conduct authentication MFA. If you are connected and you are inactive for 15 minutes, then you need to reconnect and again do password and MFA and the reconnection and all this stuff. With always on VPN-less zero trust, yes, you do it once and then it keeps alive. You are connected, you can do that. But can you imagine the people who need to connect 6, 7, 10 times a day?
Mm-hmm.
And there are 20, 30, 100 people like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
And,
it's a painful process for them. So as I said, how we can make their life easier, how we can enable them to do it more efficiently with no compromise on security. So from that perspective, SASE was enablement for the simplification of their processes, just with always on, always connected, always secured, even if it adds few milliseconds for the connectivity to any public internet resources from their corporate device.
it's and in your case, scientists working and creating product is hugely valuable for the business, and protecting the product that they're creating is hugely valuable for the business, right? So like both those things from a core function for the business are hugely important and hugely valuable.
Absolutely, but this is not what you can efficiently measure in advance to
Right.
calculate your ROI.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's
You
the problem I've run
cannot.
into like all the time. It's like, how do you, it's not like a, this, I think I don't know.
When you come to, if you you can do that, but that will be just measure the wind speed. Yeah, maybe 5-10 meters an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it just, yeah, some assumption based. It's not really real use cases. So sometimes you need to be focused on other things, and the examples I just provided, those are the additional benefits of the transitioning to the SASE platform
Right.
or any other IT investment. It's just some sort of yes, we cook the cake and this will be the cherry on top.
Right. And
All
then
these.
once people experience all the benefits, they never want to go back, and they can never imagine life without it. And then it's entrenched. It's not a, I find this with a lot of different things. I wish there was an easier way of making this shift with people if they haven't experienced this beforehand, right? Like your experience of saying, you know, a single glass of pain versus a single pane of glass. Your experience, every marketing team is telling you that we're going to give you a single pane of glass. And the reality of it is you can't, like these, especially if you have loosely coupled, disparate, different systems that were, usually acquisitions by that manufacturer that never really completely fully integrated. That's a different experience. And, it's rightfully so to be a little jaded and be like, oh, sure, you're going to give me a single pane of glass, but then you experience it. You're like, oh, wow, this really does work. And people, it's nice. And our teams are more efficient, and our architects like it, and our engineers like it. People working on this platform like it, and I'd imagine you'd be very resistant to change at this point of going to a different platform if you were going to lose that. Same thing with your teams, right?
Actually, with I cannot say that there was a huge resistance because at the end of the day, when you work in enterprise environment, you always need to keep in mind that there are plenty of new, shiny, bright objects in the market. Oh, this is a new revolutionary. Oh, this is new AI powered system which reduce your total cost of ownership by 90%. The question number one we need to answer, do we have right people with the right skills to support it when everything is implemented? What will be our operational model? How we are going to communicate with the vendor and integrate this platform with other systems? What will be how the platform will look like in 3 to 5 to 7 years time frame? What capabilities will be incorporated into that? How we can make sure that that will not become our biggest challenge and problem and vendor lock in the nearest future. And from that perspective, we need to select a partner rather than just a vendor. Because if you hate to work with this particular vendor because their support is crap, maybe it's not the best solution for your organization to go down the road with this particular vendor. Maybe you need to choose a different partner. At the same time, very important is if all, let's say, Danaher operations companies are leveraging Palo Alto, so you have experience and you can grab the knowledge from other operation companies. You can help each other. So from that perspective, the Palo Alto looked like more preferred solution for Cepheid. And we always need to keep that in mind. It's extremely important.
Yeah.
And I recently had a conversation with folks like, it's not only inside your company, but also outside the company. Can give you one example. If the Microsoft, whether it's a good, some products good, some products not very good, some products well designed, some require some area, have some areas for improvement. But what they do very well is they build the communities around their products. Even if the product has some gaps in terms of the capabilities, functionality, or maturity of the platform, there is a community who can help you. If there is a community, you don't need to worry internally that if this person X leaves the company, I have no resources to support it. I can go to community and hire someone else because it's widely available in the market. So from that perspective, Kate was a little bit of risky. And as long as they will continue to build their community where the engineers learned about the platform and the benefits and the number of people available on the market to hire, or managed service providers who can provide the service for your environment on the Kata platform. So that is number one, about people, about the process, how the platform can help me to mature my internal process, align it with the best practices for the zero trust enablement. And as I said, in our environment, it was successful because we were able to build a chain of trust from a user to device, from device to certificate, from certificate to authentication mechanism, from authentication to authorization, from authorization to SASE, from SASE to... And so some capabilities exist, some easy to manage, some not so easy to manage. So that is how the platform can help me to mature my internal processes. So in this particular case with Cato, it was very good. There are other solutions like, I don't know, Zscaler or some other proxy-based solutions. I need to set up two different clients, ZPA, ZIA. Or what if ZIA is installed but ZPA is not installed? What if the there are too many variables. You need to answer that will require more complexity and increase your operational cost. So, and last but not least, so we started with the people, then the processes, and now with the technology itself.
I'm smiling because how many times people try to run that in reverse: technology, process, people, right? And it really is people, process, technology. The acronym, PPT is like the acronym exists that way.
You were frozen for about 2 seconds.
Oh, I should have told. I was saying it's how often we see this, where people try to run this in reverse, especially marketing teams. Like they try to start technology and then push technology down, through a process into people, and it's so backwards. And it really is people and then process and then technology and working up from the bottom that way. And there's this like every time I've seen a failed deployment, I think it's because it's been approached backwards, and not actually looking at, in just the way that you just laid out.
Honestly, why start from people? You cannot do it alone,
Mm-hmm.
by yourself. So if you don't have the right team, I was lucky that I've got very, very good team, like engineers, managers around me. Very good. Without them, no way. So you need to make sure that you have the right people, even to implement it, to roll it out, to go through all the bumps on the road you may have, because you may find certain things you missed or were unable to discover during the discovery phase. So if you don't have right people, it's path to failure. So I had a brilliant folks for specifically for SASE. It was Shubham, Shaker, and David, three guys, and of course my boss who had my back, supporting me, uh, Sandeep, uh, and of course our CIO.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's amazing.
CISO and the CIO. Yeah, without that, no. If you don't have right people in place, no way you can succeed. Because every time there is even the minor issue, it could be escalated. And I had experience with folks who were in the different positions who were just screaming with a minor issue. One laptop is affected, some minor misconfiguration. They was just, oh, you are doing Kato, it's so bad, it's because of your calm down. You need to focus on bigger picture. If there is some misconfiguration somewhere in one laptop, that means our process is not mature enough. How it happened that one laptop is different than all other laptops.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another second important thing is how the platform, once you build a chain of trust which needs to be followed, can help you to mature your processes. Because in our case at Cepheid, there was no such type of such thing like a chain of trust. Laptops were provisioned without assignment to users with a proper attributes linkage, etc. There were no certificates. There was no PKI with custom attribute based certificate templates for various use case scenarios. There was no certificate based authentication for wireless. There was no always on VPN. There was no automatic account provisioning to SASE platform through Scheme, through our cloud IDP. Those are just additional benefits. People will look back and then will realize it. How many other changes? Because SASE was the primary driver of all other changes, which helped to mature the processes, align them with the business objectives, align it with the best practices, build the chain of trust, automating the entire the workflow, etc. Providing the full visibility across the network with enablement of the zero trust network access, which is not fully zero trust. That was the first step to full zero trust. But at least the first step was done, was made in the right direction. So,
Alexey, I think this is a perfect place to wrap on a great note. I probably could, I have a feeling we could go for another 3 or 4 hours. I had a question and I wanted to pose this, and I'm afraid I'm going to open up another can of worms here, but I'm going to ask it anyways. One of the things specifically with Cato they offer is this idea of like you can really crawl, walk, and run, and there is a layering of services, and this is true of most SASE platforms today, where you can start with a very basic service and you can increase, and you can layer things onto it, right? So you can add CASB, you can add DLP, you can add RBI, you can add all these things into the stack, and just like you said earlier around like the single pane of glass is really there, it really works. Being able just to enable another entitlement within the platform and get additional functionality out of it. I'm curious how that played out with you as you went through deployment and you thought about, like our objectives of solving this first initial problem, but then looking at it as this like holistic, we're going to start here and then we're going to layer on. Was that intentional all the way from the beginning, or was that, or have you, turned on things you weren't expecting to ever use because you found a use case for it, or you found a requirement that was driven by the business?
The entire project, it's the right approach from the beginning, not to try to get the big bang. Put the basic, the foundation first. Once the basic functionality is available, some basic functions, sites are connected, DHCP is available, the connectivity across the sites and the firewall rules are up and running, and then enable these ZTNA with SDP client, and it's reliable or with always on with all the components built for the PKI, for the authentication authorization, and MFA is configured for the endpoint devices, and the clients is properly being updated across various platforms. Then think about the next step with additional capabilities. In our case, we have very specific ask from InfoSec for this initiative. And we kept that in mind, and from day one we communicated it to all vendors. This is what we expect the platform to deliver because we want to enable it. With that said, we clearly communicated certain things will be enabled on the 6 months after the deployment, certain things after 9 months of the deployment, certain things we expect to be available and will be delivered after 12 months. For example, we CASB, TLS inspection, that was in our list, but we didn't expect that to be delivered from day one, because that add more complexity. You need to build a foundation and then start build the walls and then have windows in those walls.
Another good analogy.
Before you put the roof on top of it.
Yeah.
So answering your question, absolutely. The layered approach is the right approach. It's less risky, less impact on the business, easier to adopt, and with the layered approach and much easier process for selecting certain functions and getting those services as other SaaS or infrastructure as a service platforms allows. to get those services from them, like Azure, AWS. Uh, I strongly believe SaaS vendors sooner or later will offer something similar to that, where you can enable certain capabilities, play with it, then disable it if you don't like it, or select the different combinations and do it on how it's called, the usage based
Yeah.
instead of subscription based.
Yeah.
Like, you need to subscribe even if you don't use it.
It's a good
Uh,
idea. It's interesting.
uh, but yeah, there are different models for that. Of course, you can get a bigger discount if you announce about the capabilities you want to use in the future, or get uh, like with other SaaS vendors, they have oversubscription for in certain cases where you commit certain amount of a certain number of licenses in advance, you get a bigger discount. But in many cases, if you calculate the total cost of ownership, sometimes it's even not even worth of the discount you get from the vendor. So it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, that's a completely different discussion. Let's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Alexey, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your insights. It's always interesting to me to talk to people that have implemented this stuff inside of organizations as opposed to just like the theoretical. We talked to a lot of sales engineers, for instance, who don't operate. And I always enjoy talking to people that actually are pushing this stuff out and supporting businesses and users day to day, because you see a very different side of things. So I appreciate your time.
Always my pleasure to talk to you, Max. It was nice meeting you, and looking forward to continue our conversation about this topic and other topics as well.
Likewise.